What's going on, everybody? Yanni here. The LCS spring season for 2024 is upon us, and everybody has done their tier lists for the teams, but I'm actually doing a tier list for the players here. Pretty rare, and yes, there are a lot of players to go through here, but I'm going to get through all of them, give you my opinions on them. I'm not an analyst, I'm just a play-by-play caster that casts, amateur League of Legends right now. I'm not a talent evaluator or anything like that, but as a caster, I'm almost required to give my opinions on players, right? So that's what I'm going to be doing here today. You can agree with them, you can disagree with them. That's totally fine. I'm definitely going to be right about some of these, but I'm probably going to be wrong about a couple of these as well. I'm going to go through role by role, actually. So instead of team by team, like some people do it, I'm going to go by players in each role. We're going to have 4 categories here. We've got the star player category. You'll know them when you see them, of course, as we get to them. A strong player category, as in these are your number 2 players on a team. Players that are on the rise, usually reserved for young players, although we do have a couple of candidates on the rise here for this particular tier list that aren't exactly what you'd call young players. And then we have the role player tier, right? And there's nothing wrong with being a role player. Every team needs a role player, and these are the kind of players that just do their thing, fill the role. They're not going to be exceptional at what they do, but they're going to be solid, right? And they're essentially, your quote LCS starting caliber players. So we're going to kick things off with the top lane here. As you can see, I've organized everybody top lane through support, and we're going to start out with 100 Thieves Sniper. This is a player that is definitely on the rise. Listen, he's the anointed one for NA top laners, right? It is going to be his first taste of LCS action, so there is a chance that maybe on the rise is a little too premature here, but I don't think he'll settle into a role player role because he dominated the NACL at an individual level. I actually think he's going to be a strong player or even higher before the end of the year, so really, really excited for him. Next, we're going to move on to Fudge. Now, Fudge, a lot of people would put him in the star player tier. I'm going to put him in the strong player tier. He's the de facto strongest top laner in the league, in my opinion. But I also think that top lane is one of the weaker roles in North America. His numbers in the LCS playoffs, he looks really, really good. But when you go internationally against players that I think are on the same level as him, you take a look at his match against Fnatic at Worlds. He doesn't play up to his ability against teams and players that I think he can beat. So he's going to be on the strong player tier for now. Next, we're going to take a look at Rich over for Dignitas. I'm putting him at role player, man. The faker of Heroes of the Storm. He settled in an NA and had a 5-year stint across the LCK and LPL. He showed a couple of flashes last year, actually, which I thought was pretty interesting. He looked more and more like a stronger player, but I need to see more out of him. And I'm sure Dignitas needs to see more out of him so that he can be a player that Dignitas can really rely on to deliver really, really good performances. Okay, so my next one, I think I'm going to get roasted for this one. I'm putting Whippo on the role player tier. Before you go crazy about this, left to right doesn't matter. I should have said that earlier. I don't really care about left to right type deal. I just think the players are on the same tier, and if one player is a little bit better than the other, what does that matter? But anyway, I'm putting Whippo on the role player tier, and here's why. I think it's strange, right? And he's played pretty well in Challenger's queue, but I myself, I'm not big on players who have taken a decent amount of time off, right? He took a year off from competitive play. We've seen in the past players who've taken a year off, Bjergsen and Doublelift are 2 of my main examples, that they go and they take time off, they come back, and they do not look the same. Now, Whippo, I think, will be in the strong player tier before long. I don't think he's a role player for the rest of his career now. No. But for right now, I'm putting him at role player, and I think he would move up before the end of the season. In fact, I'm almost positive he would, but I can't put him in strong player right now. I don't know what he looks like. Next, we're going to go with Castle on IMT here. I'm going to put him on the rise here. We don't know a whole lot about him, right? And obviously, if you dig super deep into, all those VODs, you can kind of get a better idea of what kind of player he's like. He only spent 5 months on a training year roster before he got promoted to the LCK Challengers League roster for KT Rolster. He was there for 2.5 years. He never saw a promotion to LCK or anything like that. He had a fine run there. He had good games. He had bad games. He played tanks. He played carries. So we don't really know what his ceiling could be, right? the big question is North American top lane competition going to be weaker or stronger than LCK Challengers League competition? And I think it will. So I'm anticipating that he's going to eventually settle into like the role player tier. But for right now, we're going to put him at on the rise. All right, the next player on the list is Big Dokes. Big Dokes going into the strong player tier. Listen, the career revival has been awesome. He had a fantastic 2023. He was pretty good at Worlds. He might actually be able to dethrone Fudge as the best top laner in North America, at least in my eyes. And you know what? I actually think Dokla, with another good year, could hit that star player tier. Heck, he might only need a good spring to hit that star player tier. He has certainly been a fantastic top laner to watch, has been really, really fun to watch, and I've been really, really happy with the way he has brought his career back. So Dokla going into the strong player tier, a nice addition to that strong player tier for sure. All right, next we're going to go look at Fake God here. I'm putting Fake God in role player, right? Nice that he's had a career revival as well, back in the LCS since 2022 spring, and his run with Disguised in the NACL was really, really awesome. But we've seen him play at the LCS level before. He wasn't particularly impressive. Now, do I expect him to come back and play the same way he did? Absolutely not. I'm expecting bigger and better things out of him, but he is a role player until he shows us otherwise. All right, and our last top laner, Impact, strong player, the model of consistency. Grandpa top laner. A lot of people probably think he should be in the star player tier. I didn't think he was particularly impressive in 2023. So that's why he's in the strong player tier. In fact, I don't really think he was a star player for the last couple of years now, but he's still been absolutely fantastic and a rock that you can rely on. Now we're going to start off with the jungle. We're starting off River. I spent a long time trying to justify putting him in strong player, but River's actually going to be our first star player. And this one, I might be shooting a little too high on this one, right? But I couldn't put him in strong player. The entirety of Golden Guardians was like pretty strong. I thought that they were a team that was greater than the sum of their parts, but I saw multiple games in 2023 where River did things that single-handedly won games for Golden Guardians. So I'm willing to put him in the star player tier, even if it might be considered a little premature. All right, next, we're going to take a look at Blabber. I mean, this is self-explanatory. He goes in the star player tier. He's the best jungler in North America. I keep waiting for him to get better. I think he might have hit his peak, but listen, if his peak is star player in North America and a guy that we can feel pretty good about going into Worlds, I can't really argue against that, right? You can't put him much higher than that. The next player, XU, I'm actually going to put XU in the role player tier. He turbo smurfed in NACL spring, right? He looked super, super good. They called him up for summer. He couldn't start over Santorin in LCS summer, which was pretty disappointing in my eyes. His prior stint in the LCS was not that great, but it was also super, super short, right? So he didn't really get a chance to show his stuff. I think that he can still develop into a really nice player, but for right now, we're going to keep him at the role player tier, but I'm excited to see where he goes and what his 2024 looks like from here. Next, we're going to take a look at Inspired. I'm going to put Inspired in the strong player tier, and I could have put him in the star player tier. He didn't look 100% in spring, all right? I thought he was fine. He was pretty good, but I wouldn't say he was star player level. He didn't play in the summer, and, you know, we talked about this with Bwipo, guys that when they take a split off or even a year off, I'm still not as big on them going into the next split that they play in. So I'm going to keep him outside of the star player tier for now, keep him in strong player. However, I do think he will get into star tier, right? I think he'll get into the star player tier. I think that there are 3 incredibly great junglers in North America right now, and he's that third one. Armeo is next. Armeo's going in the role player tier. He's carved out a really nice long career for himself in an esports that's really all you can ask for. He is awesome in the NACL. He's serviceable at the pro level. He had a couple of signature wins during the regular season, and, you know, I respect that, but I can't realistically move him to a player that's on the rise or strong player before we see more from him, right? And the fact that he's already established himself for so long, this may be a situation of he is who he is. But again, he's a serviceable, solid jungler. We got Contracts. Contracts is going on the rise here. It seems a little odd to put a guy who in the past would have been considered a star with another team with the C9 run on the rise tier, but after his time there, he's average to below average, saw a couple of demotions. He looked really, really good in 2023, but I'm a guy that I just want to see a little bit more. I'm totally willing to move him into strong player. I just got to see a little bit more out of contract, so a really solid spring would probably bump him up. Boogie is next up. I'm putting Boogie in the role player tier. I might get flamed for this one. I really didn't think he was that great. His entire roster wasn't that great in 2023, but it didn't seem like he elevated many of the players around him. Nothing about his past success has indicated me that he'll move up anytime soon. So I'm sticking Boogie in the role player. I hope to see, obviously, a lot out of all of these players. I love North American League of Legends. I want all of these players to succeed. So I'm not trying to just crap on a couple of players here, but Boogie hasn't shown me a whole lot yet. And for our last jungler, we have Umti, and Umti is going to move into the strong player tier. I have to put him there. I can't put him in star player right now because obviously we have to see how he's going to play, but moving from one region to another, I have to put him in strong player. When you come from one of the two strongest leagues in the world to arguably what is the weakest major region, you become the big fish in a small pond. I can totally see this being a Pyosik scenario where Team Liquid kind of limps into Worlds, right? And doesn't look that great with him. But a couple of good weeks if he hits the ground running, he could easily be put into the star player tier. All right, now it's the role that everybody loves. We're going to start talking about mid laners here. We're going to start with Quid from 100 Thieves. I'm putting Quid at on the rise. He didn't have the greatest summer, but he had a couple of really nice games that could definitely get 100 Thieves fans excited. I think he's a guy that might be able to fall into a role player tier, but now that he's had more time to get acclimated to the US, I actually think he could perform pretty well. This is one of the players that I'm truly 50-50 on when it comes to on the rise. Now, our next mid laner, Jojo Pune, obviously going to be a star player, right? The fact that 2023 was considered a pretty down year for him, and he's still seen as far and away as the best mid laner in the region, really speaks volumes to how great of a player he is. He was almost stolen away by the LCK this year, right? Like, do we really need to put him on more of a pedestal at this point? Next, we have Dove. Dove, I'm going to put in strong player. And I think it might be a little bit controversial, but much in the same way as Umti, when you come from a strong region and you had at least a 50% win rate in individual games, I expect him to be pretty good, big fish, small pond type deal, right? And taking a look at the mid lane pool that North America has, I think it's actually pretty conceivable that Dove might be the second strongest mid laner in North America at this point in time. Next up on this list is Jensen. Jensen, I'm sorry, I gotta put you in role player. I love him to death. He's just not the star player he once was. He still shows flashes of a pop-off game occasionally, but at this point, I think he's one of the weaker mid laners in the region. Glad he's still playing, but at the same time, I'm always like, could we have promoted somebody else at this point? All right, next up is Mask, and Mask is going to go in the on the rise tier. He was a stud in the ERLs on Unicorns of Love. He had great performance after great performance. He's coming in really, really on fire to his LCS debut season. And the real question is, how strong are ERLs compared to how strong is North American LCS? If it's that much stronger, then Mask may struggle a little bit, right? But if it's kind of comparable, or if Mask is actually just really, really that good, I could see him moving up into the strong player tier for sure. All right, next up is Palafox. Christian Palafox is going to be on the rise, man. And, you know, much like contracts, I just need to see a little bit more out of Palafaker to put him in the strong player tier. But it was wonderful to see him have a great 2023. Took his team to Worlds, played pretty okay at Worlds, but really just had a really strong body of work throughout the year. I just want to see a little bit more, make sure that, yep, Palafox is that guy. We could bump him up into the strong player tier. And next up is a player that I actually think had a very similar 2023 to Palafox. It's Insanity. I actually think Insanity was a little bit better. If his team was a little better, I think he would have had a similar trajectory to Palafox. But yeah, I think Insanity performed a little bit better on an individual level. And there was a couple of times during the season that I tweeted that I thought he should have been split MVP. So he falls into the same category as a guy like Palafox. I'm excited to watch these teams go head to head and watch this mid lane matchup, because I do think that these guys are very, very close to breaking into the strong player tier and being North American mid laners that we can be super proud of and super happy to watch in every single game. In our last mid laner, it's going to be APA. APA is going to go into the on the rise tier. It feels like we put a lot of mid laners on the rise here, but a lot of them are, right? And APA, definitely one of them. His rookie season was pretty interesting. I mean, listen, Team Liquid wasn't doing that great. They subbed him in. They made playoffs. They made Worlds. I mean, you can't really argue with the results. A lot of people thought he was disappointing at Worlds. I thought he performed better than expected. And now with that Worlds run under his belt, that extra experience, I'm hoping that one day and someday soon, he'll be on the same plane as a guy like Jojo Pune, right? I'm hoping that APA can really break out and become a star mid laner in the LCS at some point in the future. All right, now it's time to talk about my favorite role, the AD carries. We have Meech as our first one up. Meech is going to go on the rise. His promotion was a little overshadowed by Masu's, but he still needs to be respected. He has performed well regardless of his team wins or loses, right? So this is a guy that it's a good indicator that he's always relevant no matter what the game state is. And with a guy like Meech on your team, you're always feeling pretty confident that, yes, my AD carry. All right, and now we have made it to the supports. Ayla, I'm putting in the strong player tier. I think 2024 is the year that he'll establish himself as a star. His 2023 was one of the best out of any player in the league. Oftentimes, he was the second best player on his team, with JoJo being the first. I'm really high on him this year. I think he's literally just maybe a couple of good games away from being in the star player tier, which is really nice to see. Listen, North American talent getting developed properly. I'm really excited to see what he's going to do on 100 Thieves, because this is a team that not a lot of people think are that great, but I think has a lot of promise. Pairing up a guy like Ayla with a guy like Meech means that you could see a really strong lane. We got Vulcan. Vulcan is still going to go into the strong player tier. It's fitting that Vulcan and Ayla are back-to-back on my list, because Vulcan's 2023 was about the exact opposite of Ayla's. I mean, they even swapped teams, and, you know, Ayla got the better of the swap both times. I think FlyQuest's summer finish is certainly concerning, but I trust Vulcan's body of work, given the fact that he's also on Cloud9, where Cloud9 has all of these other fantastic players. I mean, they've got 3 star players and a guy that I consider a really strong player in Fudge. I think this is going to be a pretty easy bounce back year for the 6-time All-Pro. Next up is Isles. All right, so I think Isles is actually a role player, and the reason for that is, I mean, his last LCS game was April 17th, 2022. 2 years, it's almost 2 years, is a really long time in esports, and he was a guy that did show some flashes during his C9 stint, but, you know, it wasn't anything crazy like, oh my god, it's a returning star coming back to play on Dignitas or something like that. He's gonna have to show me differently that he doesn't have any rust, and that, you know, he's a pretty decent player in his role, but I still think he can really show that he is a solid support. We have Busio. Busio is a player that I think is on the rise for sure. This is a really big year for him. He needs to prove that he's ready to play and rely on his instincts in his lane, because this is going to be a big adjustment. He's going from having the most veteran AD carry in the league to one of the 2 rookies in the league. So there's always a concern that he's not seasoned enough to be able to kind of guide this lane. But given the fact that he's getting paired up with Masu, makes me really, really excited. And I'm excited for him and Masu to just terrorize the North American bot lanes for years to come. I'm super excited at the prospect of them going up against like C9's bot lane, for example, and even the 100 Thieves bot lane too. Next up, we have the returning Ole. Love me some Ole, but Ole's going to go in the role player tier, and I love him to death. I didn't think he looked that great before he left for his military duties. I'm thinking that he probably learned a lot during his military duties that he could probably utilize for his gameplay. And he did reach rank 1 on the Korean server very recently. But as I mentioned with a couple of other players that have had to take breaks, I'm super hesitant on players who have gaps in their play history. I can totally see myself being wrong about him, but for right now, he's going to stick into the role player tier. All right, now we have Huhi, and this is one I could see myself getting crucified for. I'm putting Huhi in the role player tier. He's a fan favorite for good reason. He's awesome. But once again, I think that Golden Guardians was a team that was greater than the sum of their parts in many games. But I'm totally willing to change my opinion on Huhi if he's got a strong start this year. But I'm not actually sure how much better he can get at this stage in his career. But again, prove me wrong. More than happy to move him up from role player. Second to last, we have Zeyzal. I'm putting Zeyzal on the rise, and to be honest with you, I never really understood how Zeyzal experienced such a fall from grace after he got replaced for 2020 by Vulcan. He had a really solid year in 2020 with an Evil Geniuses team that wasn't that great, and I've always thought that Zeyzal has been a player that could really compete at the pro level and play really, really well. I'm really happy he's back. This is a very similar scenario to guys like Insanity and Palafox, Contracts too, who have been around for some time, but still look like that they are going through a rise and an improvement. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has been a role player this whole time, but for right now, I'm going to put him on the rise until I see anything differently. And last but not least, in my opinion, the best support in North America still, put in Court JJ in the star player category. He has certainly not looked like the support he once was. I could have downgraded him to strong player, but he was one of the guys that carried the corpse of Team Liquid across the finish line to get them into Worlds. Anybody who can do that is a star in my book. I'm looking out for some interesting decisions that he might make in the spring, because we know that he's been liable to just kind of int his face off a little bit at times, but I'm hoping that this is just a momentary setback, a rough stretch of play. But if he has not that great of a spring, I am totally willing to downgrade him back into the strong player tier, because, you know, even if he has a couple of bad games, I still think he is a really good player. That wraps it up for my spring 2024 LCS player tier list. Tell me I'm an idiot, tell me I'm a genius, and tell me where you'd rank these players in the comments. Thank you all for watching, follow me on Twitter for some nonsensical league takes, and I'll see you all again real soon.